персонаж. Тож дуже дякую нашим гостям і
очікуємо на цікаву розмову. З'ясувати, щоб всім було комфортно слухати, чи це моє питання з моїм, чи це з мікрофоном. Так. Я дозволю собі кілька хвилин зробити це представлення. Дуже дякуємо Центру сучасного мистецтва. Ще хочемо з'ясувати, ми будемо перекладати розмову. Кому потрібен переклад з англійської на українську? Кому потрібен переклад з англійської на українську?
Не соромтесь, будь ласка, просто якщо ви відчуваєте, що вам потрібен переклад, у нас, скажімо, є два варіанти. Або ми будемо робити це на широкий загал, і це буде трошечки сповільнювати темп розмови, або я зможу підсісти до вас і, скажімо, проводити вам переклад. Так. І це буде трошечки швидше.
Давайте так, що, готові без перекладу? Добре, давайте. Дуже вам дякую. We don't need to translate because everybody understands.
This is incredible.
Але якщо раптом ви відчуваєте, що вам потрібна допомога, ви підніміть руку, я до вас підскочу.
І навіть не посоромтеся, якщо раптом в якомусь випадку хтось скаже, ну слухайте, щось все-таки складновато, давайте знати. Я зі свого боку скажу кілька слів. Мені здається, що для мене, можливо не для вас, для мене це точно особливий вечір. Я дуже потішена вітати тут Басема, ще трошечки більше його представлю, але маю розповісти цю історію. Десь роки, майже 3 тому, вона взагалі про життя, коли я, як незалежний журналіст, не маючи з собою ні копійки, нічого, відправлялася знову саме в Єгипет і знала, що я зустріну Басема, зокрема. Я передивлялася його роботи, і чомусь, коли їх передивлялася, я журналіст громадського, я не маю стосунку ні до сучасного мистецтва, ні до культури, і не є там в цьому фахівцем. Мені здалося, що щось в цьому є такого особливого, і це щось дуже близьке. І чомусь так дивно, що, знаєте, я розумію, що ми завжди говоримо про, тобто українські художники їздять там на виставки, їх запрошують в Польщу, в Лондон чи куди завгодно, і запрошують арабських художників, зокрема. А ми між собою якось не спілкуємося, хоча питання і проблеми в нас дуже часто одні й ті самі. Мені здалося, що було дуже чимось таким сильним чи чимось надзвичайно цікавим, якби ми щось зробили разом, що це би був якийсь такий символ, що насправді проблеми не, я не знаю, як часто нас відволікають геополітикою чи ще якимись там заявами про розколи, про країни, про мови. І я тоді зателефонувала Каті Ботановій, які кажуть, слухай, є такі от цікаві речі, що з цим робити? Катя каже, ну слухай, це справа кураторів, розумних людей, ти приїжджай і розкажеш, що з того вийде. Але мені тоді, я там дуже сильно цим запалала, потім видалося дуже багато різних речей, виставок, подій, революцій і ще якихось інших. Але мені здається, що так дуже цікаво в житті буває, коли якісь, здається, нездійснені речі всьому свій час приходить і виявляється через кілька років, я доти не могла думати, що саме художники з там арабських країн будуть в Києві, що не просто нам цікаве те, що роблять вони. Ми просто там руйнуємо ці кордони. Отож, частково завдяки так само Басему, його розмовах там я написала книгу репортажів Майдан Тахрір, якої вже щось зараз ніби вже і немає, тільки десь в Єші залишилося, де насправді так символічно виходить, перше слово книжки починається з розмови з Басемом. Саме з ним про те, що, і він, до речі, там згадується, зокрема, той шматочок фільму, який він сьогодні покаже. Тобто виявляється, що це все не придумана історія. Отож, Басем Юсрі – єгипетський художник, який він і художник, і незалежний режисер, і дуже цікаво було спостерігати за його творчістю, він не буде в хронології розповідати. Ми знаємо, що тобто, Україна пережила революції, арабські країни пережили революції. Нам цікаво дізнатися про те, що всюди існує попит на революцію з цих країн, але часто все дуже спрощується. І ми хочемо говорити без цих спрощень. У Басема так само дуже цікава родина, його мама художниця, його брат є так само режисером театральним, який робить дуже цікаві урбаністичні проекти, але про це все згодом. And we'll give you the word finally, so everybody knows, and we can't speak without translation, so grateful to have you here.
Okay, but I'll just, first of all, I'm very happy to be here with you tonight, and thanks for coming. Very happy to visit Kiev for the first time. It's a really beautiful city. and so far I'm having so much fun. And I hope you have some fun tonight with the presentation. Hopefully it won't be too boring. If somebody at some point doesn't understand something, please raise your hand and we'll have Katya translate. So if you don't raise your hand, I'll just keep talking and showing pictures. But please feel free to stop me if you don't understand something. What am I talking about today? I'm going to share with you my work, not all of it, but some examples. I'll show you inspirations, what really inspires me and why I make what I make. Let's start by the first slide. Is there a switch to turn it on, or is it working already? Okay. No, it's not it. We need to go back to the beginning, but we're sorry about that. No, not video. Just this is not the beginning of the slideshow. You need to go to, this is the slide number 35. So you need to go to the top. Maybe you can switch your microphone off until I finish here. Okay. Do you have another remote control? Okay, sorry about that. But okay, if it doesn't work this time, I'll just give you a signal to switch to the next slide. Oh, you have this one? Maybe it will work. Okay. Okay. Still not working.
Just tell me.
Okay, so sorry about the delay starting with the technological difficulty, but this is not my work. Maybe some of you will know that. But this is. So this is a very specific ancient Egyptian tomb that I visited my last year of college years. It's in Aswan, at the Valley of the Kings, Luxor actually, not Aswan, and it's the tomb of the King Tutmosis III. The reason why I'm showing this picture specifically, you can switch to the next one. It's because that tomb really lived with me for many years, and it really inspired my style in working until today. And I didn't really figure that out like before making what I was making, but actually after. But I really realized that this specific tomb, with its very simplistic drawing style on the walls, really did something to my brain, kind of. Switch to the next one. So, as you can see, this is kind of different from the usual ancient Egyptian drawing style that's more detailed. This is very abstract and very simple, with just one line, just black on a neutral background. And I was really struck by that. So when I do that, my action, okay? You'll understand. So that's the signal, okay? I'm showing this in the beginning, not actually to brag about ancient Egyptian culture, as usually people do, but of course we are always fed up as Egyptians, since we are children, with how grand our civilization is, that we are the source of civilization for the whole world. that ancient Egyptians were amazing and we are the best country in the world, and all this like propaganda relying mainly on history. And it's true. No, it's not. It's not true. So I'm going to share with you, this is also not my work, but I'm going to share with you a piece, an installation that I did in 2013 at a governmental gallery called The Official Institution. But I'll show you a few pictures in the beginning that I took from different governmental institutions, showing the aesthetic of these institutions. So moving to reality, to the current situation in Egypt, I see failure reveal itself visually in governmental spaces. So this is an image from the governmental mail service institution. So you find signs of decay and trash just in one corner. This is an image that I took on the road back from Cairo, from Sinai to Cairo, on a very strategic checkpoint, the last checkpoint before you leave Sinai to enter, the other part of Egypt. So this sign says the frontier guards, and it's done by the military. So that for me, it's a very funny sign. It could only be done. You don't understand Arabic, the Arabic writing, but I think you can tell that this is kind of gibberish. It's kind of very childish way of making a sign. And it's a sign, it's a military sign, so it should look grand and important, but actually it looks kind of ridiculous. So this is an image that was taken in the Foreign Affairs sector in the Ministry of Culture, where somebody decides, for example, to write this means the fourth floor in Arabic, and they made a nice little ornament underneath the writing, but it's very sloppy. Yes, and this is another sign from the same place, and I was really struck by how this is actually marble. But then the purple killed me actually. Like I stood in front of it for like at least 10 minutes thinking about the purple. Like, who thought of painting this purple? And why this purple? And why sloppy like that? Like, why didn't they at least do it well? Like, they could have painted it perfectly, and maybe it would have been nice, but it's just really ridiculous. This is the inside of the door of the bathroom in the same administration for Foreign Cultural Affairs in the Ministry of Culture. And I was running an errand there that day, and I had to use the bathroom to pee like everybody else. But I was also struck by the door of the bathroom. Like, why is it like that? Like, it's a very important sector of the Ministry of Culture. In Egypt, the best country in the world and the most important country in the world, the source for all civilizations. We actually taught humanity what civilization is. So why would the door of the bathroom be like that? I didn't know actually. This is the sign for the vice of the minister of culture. And I was also struck by how sloppy the paint job is around that sign. And then walking by the door, I found an empty room. This is the room of the vice of the Ministry of Culture. I just walked in. Nobody was there. Nobody talked to me. Nobody stopped me. I found the curtains were very dirty. They don't look dirty in this image, but believe me, they were very dirty. And there was lots of crap on the ground here, lots of trash and dust and things like that. So these images, for me, were a visual symbol of the failure of the institution, of the official institution. So it inspired me to create this piece. And it was created inside a governmental gallery. It's a gallery run by the government, whose director is quite progressive actually, and who asked me to create a solo show there, knowing exactly that I will do something that will bring him some trouble. And it did, because the head of the fine arts sector in the Ministry of Culture did not like the title of the exhibition, and he wanted to stop it, but I went to meet with him, I sat with him, and he was very friendly, but he tried to convince me not to do the show, but I insisted that, it's just a show, and the audience for art in Egypt is just like, how many people would attend the show? 100 people? Why are you scared of that? Like, nothing bad will happen. If you let the show happen, then, nobody will hear of it. But if you stop it, then, there will be some noise. I didn't say that directly, but that was what I was trying to tell him. So the first image was the main wall. This is a side wall, the other side, and the back. And I mainly just gathered lots of old crap from the carpenter I work with. And just scraps of wood and different materials. And I made this really weird installation on the walls with these pieces of materials. And I completed the aesthetic with some ink drawings on the walls, reflecting how I feel about the official institution. This is a detail, and this is another detail. So it's kind of like, just, you understand probably what I want to say. So we'll go back in time, actually 1 year before that. I did a project called It's Not As Easy As It May Have Seemed to Be. Does everybody understand that sentence? Okay. This piece was shown in Doha, in Mathaf, the Arab Museum of Modern Art, and at the Institut du Monde Arabe in Paris, France, and in a museum called IVAM in Valencia, Spain, and finally in Munich at the Ancient Egyptian Museum there. So this is not a piece also. This is an image of military people putting together a concrete wall to block one of the streets, which is a scene that we started seeing a few months after the revolution started, because protests persisted. There were protests all the time in the area surrounding the Ministry of Interior, which is the Ministry of the Police, of the state. So they were putting these really beautiful cement walls, and people were writing on them sentences of freedom, of resistance, trying to resist it. This is not a very good picture because I pulled these pictures from the internet. I didn't take them myself. And there were initiatives of actually making illusions on the walls that the street still continues, and they actually really inspired us to kind of create something more beautiful out of them. And they really inspired me in a very specific moment, actually. In one of the walls, the people were destroying them with their bare hands, with very primitive tools. So you would see people using ropes and metal rods and wooden bars to move each block individually and then drop it on the floor. And I was there to watch that at one time. And that scene really lived with me for a long time before doing that piece. It was actually more than a year before making that piece. So this really, this meant something really big to me, that just little people destroying a big, heavy cement wall. And it was more symbolic than the action, actually. It was how the collective can actually change something that seems impossible. So I created a piece inspired by that scene, and this is a detail of the piece. And I created that piece at the time. Actually, I was feeling a little frustrated with the situation, because we were, like, the people were doing always demonstration after demonstration, and then there was the military council was ruling the country at that time, and they were resisting, and they were very clearly delivering the country to the Muslim Brotherhood, the religious radical force at that time. So I created this piece within the context of a group exhibition titled Tea with Nefertiti, and the group exhibition was actually discussing the relationship between the artwork, the maker of the artwork, the intentions of the maker, and the museum, how the museum could give it a different meaning. And we usually don't question museums. When we read the label in a museum, we don't actually think whether it's right or wrong. We just see it as the truth. It's a piece of information that's telling us what the piece is about. And this show gathered pieces from antiquity and pieces from modern art and contemporary art. And there were pieces from all over the world, artists from different countries. And I was commissioned to create this piece as a kind of a commentary on the concept of the show. So it wasn't just inspired by the political situation in Egypt, but it was actually asking questions about representation within the museum context in general, which are questions that I always think about. How do I deal with the gallery? Like, is the gallery good or bad? Are museums good or bad? I don't have a personal problem with museums. I just have a problem with the traditional modes of representation in general. I like art that tries to push boundaries. And that piece was kind of symbolic on different levels and layers to me, because it was art destroying art in a certain way, because it was the small figurines. I created about 800 of these little guys for that exhibition, and they were just all over the place, running, pushing things and destroying the golden frames. And this is a more general view of the installation. This is a side view. And now we move back in time to 2008. Actually, it was this is a movie that I produced. I finished making in 2009, but the idea came to me in 2008. And the reason why I'm going back in time to this specific project, it's because creating video was what really changed my style and changed my work into creating what I'm creating now. Like, my whole mindset and my whole thinking of art making, of my practice, changed because of video. And it's really weird how I came to start making a video, because I was a very traditional painter until 2008, actually. And at that year I was doing my master's in the United States in visual arts. But I was stuck with painting. I was always creating figurative painting, and I didn't know at some point why I'm making paintings. I felt that there was something that's not coming out. There was something that I wanted to say, but my art is not reflecting it. So I got a crazy idea. I was going for vacation to Egypt for 2 months in the summer of 2008, and I thought I would create a movie. I had never before filmed, used the camera, or did editing, video or sound editing. But I had this crazy idea that I want to make a movie. And I thought of creating the movie out of very banal scenes. Just, really insignificant scenes that would happen to me during that vacation for 2 months. So I would film with conversations with friends, with family, things that I see in the street, random people. And I thought that, because I always think that the most ridiculous actions that in our day-to-day life, they have significance, and they are affected by the kind of politics we live within, the kind of economy that we live within, and so on and so forth. So I thought that I could actually create a narrative, an incoherent narrative, out of these random scenes, which is a concept that I still deal with in different ways, and I'll show you that. So we can play now the first video. It's just 5 minutes of a 40 minutes long movie.
وبمناسبة انك بتصور احب اقول بتصريح عند التأمل في احوال مصر المحروسة ما عادتش محروسة مبروك.
ما بتعملش وانت نفسك؟ نعم مش راضي انزل تعالى بكره لا ده مش بكره كمان موجود انزل لا مش لا ممكن اه بس لا مفيش في داي مود باك لايت كومبنسيشن اون سلام هتيجي كل الحاجات
انا عايزه حاجه تفكر
انا دايما كنت بتصور بس الاول خلي كل يعني كوعك عند الفوضى هنا انا سنده على الشنطه يا سلام لا كده الشنطه متحركه عشان هي متحركه يا حمار لا دي مش متحركه يا حمار يا ابني ما انت تبقى
هو كان في سفرية لاسكندرية.
في عيد طبعا هو بجري وعيد بسيط فشخ 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 حبيبي ورايا
ايوه
وارز وعمال انا سريع يا جماعه ليه مش عارف اجري
وحلو ان انا اقع ده كتير
بجد لا انا مش لا
كتير جدا
هي بس الوقعه والخبطه دي بتحصل بتبقى لسه تقريبا هتروح في النوم او ما تفهمش حاجه وفضل تعمل كده طول القشره انا لسه كويس بتعرف تنام تاني عادي بتحصل كتير لا بس الجري والطيران بتلاقي انت بتجري وانت في الهواء صح؟ وتوصل مثلا لحته عاليه تقعد عليها شويه وبعدين ترجع تاني بتسوي مش ان انت بتطير كانك عصفوره
حاجة زي كده مثلا يعني بلد مطولة زي دي زي بلدنا كده ناس كتير مثلا اليمين مفيهوش حيطة السلام عليكم تطلع ازاي؟ بره بره كده على طول يمين شفت؟
original movie works fine. So it's a 40 minutes long movie with the same crap. It's just like a bunch of random scenes, one after the other. But I could actually make like some parts where I realized that they were about certain topics. So there were about 4 topics in the movie that were tackled very indirectly. And upon my return to the United States, I made a movie, the second part of the movie, but in Philadelphia, where I lived for 4 years. And it was the first one was called Keep Recording, and the second one was called Still Recording. And for me, they are one piece of work that's divided into 2 projects. And both together, they make a feature-length movie for like an hour and a half. So I said that this experience really changed my understanding of my practice, because video editing it made me realize that one scene by itself doesn't have a meaning. It only gets a meaning when you put a scene behind it and the scene after it. And then you create a progression, you create a narrative. So I started thinking of my practice in the same way. That I cannot just make a painting and think of it as a piece of art. And I'm not generalizing about all paintings, but I'm talking about for me personally. Making a painting did not seem enough anymore. So I started thinking of visual art in the context of a gallery space as a progression also, as the concept of editing has to exist. And the relationship between the objects and the space started becoming very important to me. And that's why I started making installations right after working with video. Okay, so this is one of my most recent pieces. It was done at the end of last year. It was a solo show called RGB1 at a gallery in Egypt. And I pretty much did a very similar concept to the movie that I had done 6 or 7 years before that. So I created this, I transformed the gallery walls into kind of the surface for a graphic novel, a very incoherent graphic novel. It doesn't have a story, a clear story. It doesn't have a beginning, climax, or an end. It's just a bunch of random instances arranged on the gallery walls randomly, and the hope was that the whole thing altogether would actually tell some story. They were scenes inspired by daily life, by Egypt, but also by the global context and by the human condition. Some really philosophical questions were asked, and some commentary on society. So the idea of creating documentary work started also with me because of working with video, of creating kind of a documentary video work. So some scenes are really absurd actually, and they don't mean anything specific, but some were inspired by direct things that I encountered in my day-to-day life. So I will stop speaking for a little bit. I'll show you examples of individual pieces. They have a translation down here. I actually think Natalia should probably translate each slide for this time, just so that we get the humor a little bit.
Отже, перший чоловік, який ліворуч, говорить, що психіатр сказав мені, що в мене хронічна депресія. Чоловік праворуч йому відповідає, що ти будеш з цим робити? Забирайся звідси, погань, я провчу тебе зараз, я провчу тебе урок, який ти ніколи не забудеш. Ти не зможеш нічого зробити. І як ви бачите, пані та панове, в верхньому правому кутку 2 крапки. У мене погане прочуття щодо цього. Чому вони нас тут тримають і приносять нам їжу кожного дня? Корова праворуч запитує, корова ліворуч відповідає: ти маєш дякувати Богу і просто їсти, тому що інші не мають і половини того, що ти маєш. Справа в тому, що лайно це не просто шматок, це не просто власне шматок гівна, який виходить з чогось ззаду, тому що лайно це спосіб життя.
That's my favorite.
Це мій улюблений слайд. Чоловік з пістолетом говорить, ні, нормально, дякую. Я дуже перепрошую, що ставлю вас в подібну ситуацію, шокої, але я не хотів бути сам в цей момент. Звичайно, хтось має бути тут для того, щоб прибрати весь цей безлад і поховати моє тіло. До побачення, Юсрі. Чоловік, не роби цього, Салати. Я не хочу бачити твого обличчя, я не хочу більше тебе бачити, не хочу бачити твоє обличчя знову. Жінка попереду відповідає, добре, я йду, але зараз запам'ятай, що я тебе попередила. Я не відповідаю за те, що станеться надалі. Я думаю, що ідея, яка стається, власне, концепція цього мистецтва, вона дуже хороша, але стиль промальовки насправді дуже поганий.
And this one doesn't need translation. The Egyptian flag has three colors. It has red, white, and black. And there is an eagle in the beginning, in the middle of the flag, a yellow eagle. So this is my version of the Egyptian flag. You can go to the next slide. So this work was also meant to be published as a book, a non-linear comic novel that doesn't have a story. The initial design of the book, when we dreamt of it, myself and the book designer, we had this dream of creating it with the wires, without actually a first page and the last page, so that you could actually flip it. It doesn't begin somewhere and end somewhere. You could open it at any page and keep reading. But due to budget restrictions, we had to stick with the normal format of books. And it was published as a book, and I don't know how successful it is as sales go right now, but hopefully it will get sold in great numbers. But when I thought of this project, I thought of it as a book and as an art installation. And for me it was important to actually realize it in both mediums, because each one has a different function and each one reaches a certain kind of audience. That was my first book, first published book actually, and I plan on this. This one is called RGB 1 because in my mind there is RGB 2 and 3 and 4 until I get bored of this concept. So going back in time to 2012, I'll talk about a project called the Parliament of the Revolution that was also shown at a governmental gallery in Cairo at that time. And this continues this idea of documentary work. I started really realizing that I'm commenting on things that happen to me or in my context at the time they're happening or after. So this became a very important aspect of my work. And that year, in January of 2012, was the first democratically, it was a year after the revolution, and it was the first democratically elected parliament in Egypt. And I also created an installation in one room that reflected my feeling towards that democratic. So this is not the thing, no, but you can stay on it. But I'm actually going back to this image because the idea of documenting history is actually very old. In my perception, it really goes back to this notion of ancient Egyptian murals and tombs, because what they were doing is that they were writing history. So, but you never know the truth behind history, because the common saying that says only victors write history. It's quite true. But I'm thinking of my version of history actually. How do I write my history? That's very important to me. And I think that works of art and songs and like music and theater that's done right now and documented thanks to how cheap and accessible technology is to our generation is. It's a way to document history. But I cannot document history in a very serious way because I'm not a serious person. I'm really silly and I like sarcasm. It's a way to defeat frustration and to overcome obstacles. So that parliament was a really ridiculous parliament. It was completely handed to radical Islamists, the Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafists. So for me, what I expected as an Egyptian living in Egypt and knowing the Egyptian society, I expected a more diverse parliament, not a joke, not a parliament run by people who think that you know, what they should discuss as legislations in the parliament is making the age for marriage 11 years, you know, that you could marry an 11-year girl, for example. And actually the people with the beards and the radical Islamists, they think of that. They actually discussed in one session whether a man should be able to sleep with the body of his dead wife or not before she's buried. So they were discussing things like that. So that was my version of you know, my image of that parliament. And there was a video projected in this drawn TV, and I will show you a section of the video later. These are some details inspired by, you know, Egyptian characters in society. Okay, so I go a deeper flashback to the year 2003, and that's the year when I graduated from college. So I was just a little boy trying to learn how to draw very well and impress girls, you know, draw realistically. This is not my drawing. Just to be honest with you, I know it's impressive, but I cannot take credit for it. These are, I was very impressed at that time with Fayoum portraits, which is like also a later phase of the ancient Egyptian art, but it was after the time Romans invaded Egypt. So it had some Greek elements to it and Roman elements to it, but it was a very powerful group of portraits. They were drawn on the coffins of the dead bodies, and they were just amazing, very realistic and very expressionist. And I was, as a little boy, learning how to draw very well. This was a very impressive reference for me. So I created also my own version of that. I was impressed by that stylistic aspect of that group of work. I'll go very fast with these images. Okay, stop. Because I'm showing you how my work progressed over the years and why it progressed this way. So this just shows my concern with society at that time. It was a very early interest in my work, because at that time in college there was a huge current of Islamization that was happening. There were lots of preachers that were influencing young girls and boys into becoming radical, into wearing the veil. So there was a huge contradiction in my surrounding. My 18 to 22-year-old boys and girls who were starting to become really reactionary in the way they were thinking that that's what God wants. So that really struck me, because there was also a bunch of kids who were very Western looking, who would listen to metal music, and I could see both, but there was the radical current was much stronger than the Western current. But it was a very weird thing to me, because it seemed to me that Egyptians were rejecting some kind of origin or some kind of identity and trying to seek comfort in other identities. So to me there was a huge confusion in my surrounding. So I represented it very literally, because when we're young we're naive, and I was naive, and I produced very naive work. But I still think of it, it's important to me because it shows me where I started from and how I developed. a few years after that, that was my second solo show in the United States. I was in my first year of graduate school, and I was still creating paintings, influenced by ancient Egyptian visual as well, because I couldn't digest that and make it into something more personal. So I was kind of creating cool imagery, relying on the ancient Egyptian work that I'm impressed with. And this was made on papyrus, the ancient Egyptian paper, and I had carved this wood and burned the pieces. So it was a beginning for me to start not considering my work very precious, because when you actually bring fire next to your piece and let the fire shape parts of it or erase parts of it, it's a very hard exercise. So I think this body of work was the beginning of me revolting on my old way of working. But I was thinking, why am I making faces that are very melodramatic? Why so sad, like the Joker says in the Batman movie? Why so sad? I just couldn't understand, because I'm not like that. I'm not a sad person. I have sadness deep inside, like all of us. But I'm not melodramatic. I'm not crying right now to you. Otherwise, you would have left the room. And that's how I feel about movies or artwork that's melodramatic. I feel like the movie maker is just sitting next to me and saying, life is awful. I hate life. I don't want to sit next to a person who's saying that or crying all the time. So I left that and I started developing my work in 2008, 2009, right before creating that movie that I showed you an excerpt of. So I started mixing the serious figure, the visually, the realistically rendered figure with some really silly and weird figures. That kind of, later on, they actually took over completely, because now I'm creating these small figurines and I'm creating the stupidly drawn human figures. So the realistic figure that showed my skill and impressed the girls is gone. It's history. And that was the phase when it started actually disappearing from my work. I had never done abstract painting up until that year, 2008, 2009. So I started experimenting with abstract expressionism, but the small, stupid figures started also appearing. And they were kind of mocking all serious attempts of making a real painting or a real work of art. So, and the titles of the pieces were quite romantic, actually. But this one is called "Enjoying the Sunset." Can we go back to the previous one? And this one is called "By the Frozen Lake." So this romantic notion of man and nature, and the beauty in general. I was just revolting against that. Okay, and then I started making more philosophical subjects with the same matter. And this whole body of work was done in 1 year, actually. So this is called Creation of Eve from Adam's Rib, which is, I think, a biblical notion also, that Eve was created from Adam's rib. Because I had these philosophical questions also, where do I come from and where am I going? But I started thinking of them also in a light-hearted way. This is detailed, so I was still experimenting with paint and the thickness and the thinness of the paint, and mastering oil painting was something very important to me. These are really huge paintings. They are kind of as big as this whole side wall here. And this was made in 2 panels, and then there was the red figures. This thing is not working. No, go back. I just wanted the pointer, but it doesn't point. So the red figures were jumping on the head of the beautiful model there, and walking on the edge of the canvas, going on the wall, and then coming out of the wall. Next. This is just to show you how skilled I am at painting. I was pretty good, I think. And then the red figure kind of came to life in that piece of work. It just became a 3D object. And this is very symbolic to me because that's what happened to me, actually. I left the two-dimensional surface and the two-dimensional concepts I was working with, and I started thinking in a more three-dimensional way. And then, after that, I started creating installations. So that was the beginning of All Evil, that the next project was, which was done right after the group of work that I just showed you. And it was my graduation project for my master's in the United States at Temple University. And I titled the installation All the Important Issues, because I always know that I'm talking about important issues. But I can't be specific. I just talk about everything. I kind of, sometimes I'm kind of specific, but I don't think one can be specific, because each subject is related to other subjects. So I started again, because this really has a lot to do with this installation for me. So, like video editing, one scene cannot live by itself. It can only live if it's put in the middle of two other scenes, and so on. So I started thinking of the gallery space as a timeline for a movie, and I'm creating the scenes that relate to one another and relate to the viewer. So I started really thinking of audience as part of the piece. Like, these figurines are very small and you walk around them, so you become very important in the room. You become part of the piece. Your relationship to these little guys that you're looking upon became very important. So these are some details. And of course, there was commentary on Egyptian society, on radical Islamization that I was really scared of at that time. The idea of representation, of art, of beauty, of God and existence, everything. It's all the important issues, seriously, I meant it. And then there was this crazy character that I created at that time called Mr. Mukhtar. I'll show you one of his speeches, who was preaching people. The trend of YouTube stars was not really strong at that time, but I started it. I didn't start it, but I was influenced by it, by these people who would come on the web and then start preaching or talking about something very stupid, thinking that it's very important. This guy came to life because I was very lonely at that time, and then when you're lonely you create crazy things. So I was kind of getting the crazy guy out of my system by portraying him, by actually filming him. More ancient Egyptian stuff. So audience is very important. The idea of somebody watching a projection, that was a realization for me, that I don't make my work just for people to enjoy it, but actually to relate to it. So it became very important to me to think of audience while creating a piece. And they're smiling because my work is, it's pretty good. Okay, next. Okay, so this is Mr. Mukhtar, performed by myself. And he's always talking about very important issues also. So sometimes, he always starts the videos by saying, so I would like to talk to you today about, or the issue of. He always wants to mobilize people, but he never says anything meaningful. He always asks really vague questions without giving any kind of propositions or real answers. And this is the video. Actually, you can click on the video, maybe it will play. It's a 4 minutes long video, and it shows you exactly what Mr. Mukhtar is about.
النهارده كنت حابب اني اتكلم معاكم عن موضوع الحاجات هي بتنزل مسألة غريبة، ولكن مسألة جميلة ورغم الريحة والقرف اللي بيحصل إحساس ممتع وشيء من الراحة، إحساس جميل، إحساس بالارتياح، متعة 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 وصفاء للذهن، لأنه تتخيل عدم إمساك مسألة خطيرة، مسألة خطيرة، وبتخلي الواحد في حالة خطيرة، حالة خطيرة، ووضع مش طبيعي، وضع مش طبيعي، وبتخلي إن البني آدم مش بيفكر. الواحد لما بيفكر كده ويشوف قد إيه موضوع كثير من المحاولة والعناء، ولكن هو مش عناء، لأنه زي ما قلت قبل كده.
Okay, so that's one of the lectures of this guy, Mr. Mukhtar, and Mukhtar means the chosen one. So he's the chosen one. So he talks about different things. Sometimes one time he talks about love. One time he talks about Al Pacino. One time, like he's all over the place, and I think he gave about 16, 17 lectures, one after the other. So the whole thing is 17 minutes long or something. So it's a long video. And I'm sorry the voice is not playing with the image. I don't know why this is happening. But you can watch all the videos on YouTube. They're there. So next slide, please. Okay. So in 2009 also I graduated. I got my master's. I became an accredited artist. I had my first commission after graduating, right after graduating, where I was invited by the Pennsylvania Downtown Center, which is a state in the United States. They were creating a project to beautify small towns all over the state. And you had to apply as a muralist or a landscape architecture or an architecture. And they would choose from the applications. And if you're chosen, you would contribute in one of, I think, 5 projects in different places. So I was chosen as a muralist, and it was my first mural project actually, to work with the community for 3 months in a very small town in the middle of the how do you say that? In the middle of village in Pennsylvania, where there are Mennonites and Amish, which are small religious groups that kind of live in the Dark Ages. They don't use electricity, they use very primitive tools, they have a certain kind of uniform. So it was a very weird experience to me, and I had to live in that small town in the middle of that really weird area for 2.5 months and work with the community, children and grown-ups, and we created a large mural, but it was done in a very different way, where it was divided into squares that were painted on some kind of fabric that was stuck to the wall later on, and it became part of the wall. So it's meant to live for as long as possible, but it's just made in a peculiar way. So these are images of the preparation, and this shows you how it was realized. So this square goes in a very specific section of the wall until the whole picture is finished. And before that, I was very used to working by myself in my studio, and I have to say I was a very arrogant person. I would never trust anybody else to help me or to create anything with me. I would always feel like if I'm collaborating with people, they would ruin my work. I really felt that, I very honestly. But that experience was very important to me, to kind of let go a little bit of that, to have little kids help me with the work, and work in a team for a very long time. So it was a very happy experience and very, very good. So this is an image of the site where the mural was executed, but a century ago. And it was actually a train station. And this is the building of the train station, and now it's actually the building for the downtown administration of the town. And this is the same site at the time I realized the mural. So it became an administrative office, but they left a monument over there of one of the wagons of the train. So this inspired me to transform the wall that was on the left side into a platform where the people are waiting for the train to come. So it was kind of inspired by the history of the town. I had to visit the Historical Society building and read about the history. I had to sit in community meetings and talk with the people in charge of the town and with the people who lived there. I had to present sketches to the people in community meetings and get their approval. So for the first time, I was no longer the god of my work. I had to submit to what people have to say. I had to please them, I had to convince them. So again, my relationship to audience was really, it took to a different level with that project. So these are some details. So that's the uniform I'm talking about. It was very normal to walk around town and see women or girls dressed in this traditional kind of dress. And then there's a man on the left over there with the little kid. That's an Amish guy. They all look like that. They dress like that. They have a uniform. But then there are also people who just look American, like all other Americans. So the reason why I went back to this project, it's because this really gave me an interest in public art and work that's completely done in a different world, in a different medium, it's more on a large scale, and it's seen by a larger audience. And I started really being interested in this, and it led me actually to a completely different type of project that I did in 2011, which is called Spread a Word campaign in English, but in Arabic it's ما تخسرنيش. And ما تخسرنيش is a word that means don't lose my friendship. And I'll give you a little bit of a backstory to it because it's very important. Just 20 days before the revolution started in 2011, the government felt that something is about to happen because Tunisia had already started and they kicked out the president, and then there were calls on Facebook for Egyptians to go to the streets on the 25th of January, which was the police day. It's a kind of a holiday for the police. So they were kind of scared that maybe something would happen. So they created this kind of conspiracy event where they exploded. They created an explosion in a church in Alexandria. And it's a very old strategy for totalitarian regimes where they have to divide people. So in Egypt there are some unspoken of problems between Christians and Muslims. Are you guys bored yet, or no? This is still okay? Yeah? You're following? Okay. So the government has been always playing with this idea of sectarianism, of turning people against each other, of getting people scared of a civil war. So they were trying to initiate that. And we were very scared, because we know that there's not Egyptians are not the most tolerant people towards difference. It's actually a problem until today in Egypt, but it never went to the limit of becoming a civil war or a violent clash between masses against other masses. But myself and other artists and filmmakers and singers got together after that incident and decided that we have to do something. We have to use our tools to kind of help with this problem, because it was an explosion in a church. It's really ugly. A lot of people died. So I thought at that time of creating a visual campaign that says "Don't lose my friendship." It was the idea was to create a bunch of different words that emphasize accepting the other, not hating the other, not dismissing the other, not changing the other, but rather accepting them, not loving them. You don't have to love me, but you could just let me be. You could not hate me. You could not ignore me. You could acknowledge my presence, my intelligence, my life, so that was the concept. And the concept was to create just a few samples in this format that says, don't do this to me, or don't consider me this or that. And have people actually say other words in the same vein, in the same manner, with the same principle. And I was hoping that if people had liked them, that they would use them as Facebook pictures and cover photos and such. The project was not realized at that time because the revolution happened 20 days after that, and then we realized that that wasn't the problem. The sectarianism and the bombing was not an issue, because actually people got together and they were revolting against the enemy, the state. So the idea was not realized, but then a few months after Mubarak, the former president, left, similar incidents started happening again, and we also knew that it was staged, but it could have led to a big problem, so it was time for the campaign to be launched 3 months or 4 months after the revolution. And it actually succeeded instantly on Facebook, where until now I actually see Facebook pictures, profile pictures with some of these words. So this one says, don't change me, don't silence me, don't reject me. So the campaign was transformed into posters after that, and volunteers helped pasting it all over the streets of Cairo and then Alexandria and other smaller cities. And of course the state would get pissed off, and then they would paint them with this really ugly color that actually I showed you how the paint jobs of the government is usually like earlier. So they use the same aesthetic in the streets also. So this is another example of this is Don't Silence Me. This is in Alexandria. Actually, a bunch of volunteers took posters from me, and then they started putting them in the streets of Alexandria. Happy kids. And then some people started using them in demonstrations to send messages. Although they were not very ideological, they were not actually made for a specific group of people to use. They were not funded by any kind of party, political party or politician. They were just meanings. They were human rights advocate words. They were meanings that just emphasize that you should respect humans, other humans. And then the project spread out that there was this banner festival in the countryside of Denmark, and I was invited to create a banner, and I presented it to Denmark people in the countryside. So it really spread out. It became T-shirts, and then people started wearing them. And until now, you could actually see people all over the Arab world wearing these T-shirts. I just received a Facebook message a couple of days ago saying, "Oh, I saw 4 of your T-shirts in Beirut today." One of my friends was telling me that. So that was one of my most successful projects, actually. And it was more successful not because I created it. It was actually successful because people helped make it bigger, and they added sentences and meanings, and they put money to print posters, and they put effort and time to put them in the streets. So that's all related to the idea of creating public work, like the mural that I did in the United States. I wouldn't have thought of this project if I hadn't done it, for example. And then this is one of the project right before the last one I will show you. We're coming to the end, so bear with me. So just a couple of months ago, in April, actually it's just 1 month ago, there was a music festival that was happening in Egypt for the first time, with a very interesting concept of creating a camp in the middle of the desert and putting a stage there, some restaurants, some tents, and some art projects where hundreds of people would come and sleep in the camp and enjoy concerts and art. So it was kind of a pocket of freedom created in the middle of the desert just a month ago. And it was a very successful event. And I was actually commissioned by the festival organizers to curate an art show, kind of outdoors art show for the festival. So I kind of worked with 3 other artists on creating site-specific pieces. So I built some structures for them to create murals on. But I'm going to speak about my personal installation that I did there, which actually started when, with the idea of another project that I did in last October, of working with an artisan workshop where they were creating the butcher's tables, the huge table with large legs that the butcher uses to cut the meat on. I don't know if you have similar ones here, but in Egypt there are really large objects that you put the animal on, and then the butcher, you see him cutting them. So I worked with that workshop, but I thought of transforming it. So the butcher's table looks something like that, but it's a little shorter. The trunk would be shorter. So do you have something similar to that here? Yeah? So I worked with them on transforming them into figures. So this one was put in the camp, welcoming the campers, the comers. And this is the campsite before the camp was built. It's just a valley in the middle of the desert in Sinai, quite empty. And then there was this plan. This is the hanging out area, toilets over there, and it was actually realized like that. Food vendors, and then the stage is over there, and then the tents were back in the desert over there. So this is like the beginning of the construction, just to give you an idea. This was during the festival actually. There was some puppet shows. This one is actually a wall built in the middle of the camp with a door inside and with some sculptures hanging here, done by another artist. And then there was a room over there done by I created the structures, but then a muralist created the work. And then I'm going back to these figures because I had this dream of creating a life-size version of these figures in stone that would look exactly like that. I have this dream until now, and I still want to do it, of creating like 100 sculptures, but big, like life-size big, in the middle of some public space or the desert or somewhere where people can actually walk through them or take pictures through them. But I thought that I don't have the capacity right now, financially or like logistically, to create this piece. And then I thought of the project that I did with the butcher's workshop, and I realized that, okay, maybe I can create something with wood that kind of works with this concept. So I created more of these figures, 10, and for me this is kind of a sketch for the stone project that I still want to create. And it actually worked very well in that surrounding, the material-wise, and then the people's interaction with it was really incredible. That was exactly what I was hoping for, because people started just like fooling around and taking pictures with the sculptures, imitating their movements and how stiff they look and things like that. So the last thing I will show, and it will only last for a minute, is what I'm working on right now. But it's a project that I started working on in the end of 2010, which is a documentary movie also, but it has some layers to it, where I was working with several people. Again, I no longer started hating collaboration, and I actually see collaboration now. I started working with a bunch of young Egyptian people, not just artists. Some of them are artists, some of them are just lawyers or doctors or whatever. And we started working on a workshop to write a romantic comedy. And of course, it's not a very serious romantic comedy, but it was kind of a way to criticize the romantic comedies that we see, that influence our life as culture. Actually, they present them to us in movie theaters as cultural pieces, although they're kind of dumb. So I was filming these workshops where we create the characters, we create the story, we write the scenes and everything. And it started right before the revolution, but then the revolution happened, so the process got really elongated. Instead of taking 2 months, it took a whole year to finish the project, the workshops. But it was very rich because then it had a completely different background where something really big happened, and then we were influenced by it. Because I was also filming these people in their daily lives outside the workshop. So that's a second layer. So the creative process was filmed. The documentary aspect of the life of the creators was filmed. And then we will actually film some of the scenes as a fiction. So the contributors to the workshop will be actors acting the roles that they wrote. And then everything will be intertwined. But the project took so long because I have a lot of footage. I have 200 hours of footage. But I couldn't really work on it the past few years because my relationship to the revolution had to be dealt with because the events changed all the time. And if I had finished this project the same year the revolution happened, it would have been a movie about the revolution where you see scenes in Tahrir Square and clashes with the military and the police. Then I took a lot of footage of that. But now I have a completely different view of the situation, so I think it's actually for the best that I waited for this long, but I'm hoping to finish the project this year. And I will show you the trailer of the movie that was created. It's 1 minute long, and then we'll end at that. Maybe it will work from here, no?
أنا هعمل فيلم رومانسي
Yeah, I don't know why the sound is not showing with the picture, but you kind of get an idea of the. This shows kind of the spirit of the movie, what it will be like, but not what it will be about. So I think let's go to the next slide. The very end. You can scroll to the very, very end. So I think it's just a thank you slide. So thank you very much. I hope it wasn't too boring and too exhausting. And I was very happy to be here with you, and I hope that there will be some conversation, questions, and I'm ready for Natalia to...
Okay. And I should be said that I'm very happy that we're not talking just about the politics and the revolution in Egypt, but this is my part of it. But I'm curious also about during this time, it's also probably for you, wherever you come, people speak about the revolution. When the Western curators come, they want to hear something related to the revolution. That's what something we feel, because that's something which sells, that's something which is audience interested. How you get out of that, and how you make this balance between, you know, because there is a demand, and you kind of feel that's something which people are curious.
Yeah. The demand was definitely more before, in the past few years. Now the demand is getting a little less because the revolution idea became less trendy because things took a very wrong turn in some Arab countries like Libya and Syria, for example. And even Egypt, now we have a dictatorship, a military dictatorship. So it's not as cool and trendy to be talking about the Arab Spring anymore. But even when people do it, when people actually approach me about the show, about the revolution, I don't really escape from it, but I always think that it's up to me what to do. It's up to any artist how to deal with a given topic or a given context. So I try not to be forced to create a specific work for a specific context, but rather actually give my context. I could be critical of a show about the revolution that's done right now. I could actually present a piece in the show that's critical of how naive the idea is, for example. So that's how I deal with it. And sometimes people could, I think it's still legitimate that a curator could actually curate a show about revolution or post-revolutionary feeling or transformation or whatever. It just depends on the approach. So that's the point. It's what you make, what makes it different or valid or not.
What I'm also interested to let us know a bit more about this maybe change. It's not about just revolution, but the change which happened with the identities of the Egyptians because of this term after these years. Because what you pointed out that there were always traditions that there were either something brought like very westernized, or something very like the kind of society we're going with a tradition to something. People were going to the Gulf countries and bringing all this like not radicalism but something. So people kind of were still going to two extremes which were not really natural to Egypt. So how it's going on and what has changed and what is the discussion about that?
Actually, I think one of the good things that the revolution resulted in is the social change. So society changed positively, in my opinion, because radical Islamization has declined over the past few years, especially at the time that the Muslim Brotherhood took power of the country. So people had a reaction towards that because they saw how ridiculous that was, how reactionary that was, and how that's not bringing anything good to the country. So there was an opposed wave to that, and you see the change in society. Society is becoming a little more progressive. The contradiction is less. That's how I feel. And then there are still social initiatives for change, like there are lots of active groups that work against problems that were never spoken of before, like sexual harassment, for example, which was always a big taboo, where the woman is always blamed for being harassed and not the harasser, for example. So you see groups of people working on that topic, and then other topics also, like the political prisoners. There are lots of initiatives to support them and create awareness around that. So I think society is moving forward, even if the government is actually very totalitarian and very, it's militaristic. It's very, censorship is a big thing right now. But I still see light at the end of the tunnel.
And also, you mentioned this, because we are all speaking anyways, I think like anyway people ask the question about somebody, they ask the question about themselves, so that's what we're really doing here. The moment you mentioned this thing about the unity, that the totalitarians, the dictators, they want to kind of split the society, and if you speak also about some sectarian issues, but there was this moment also that during some time there was a unity between the groups of people. So for instance, there were radicals together with the liberals, and the activists together with the radicals to get rid of the dictator or something. But later, the radicals overtaken that.
Yeah.
Later, there was a situation when the activists kind of went together with the military all together, and usually, then also the military went to power, but the others kind of who sacrificed and went for this union, they are behind the everything, not behind the bars. But I remember exactly at that moment when there was this change from the Islamists in Egypt. I know it's getting all political, but like it's going to something else. But when the Islamists were there, I talked to the young Egyptians and said like, oh, it's better to make this unity between one extreme part just to get rid of the others. do you think it's working? That it's always, you know, this kind of unity that you're kind of giving away a bit of your freedom, making the concession, you know, that okay, you know, these guys we scare in order that we get rid of these guys. How it's working for you? Because you were also kind of talking about, you know, it's better not to have the Muslim Brotherhood in power as well. So maybe.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that unity is a very weird word as well in that context, because yes, people united at some point, and I'm sure that the same thing happened here, where you didn't feel any political differences at some point when everybody was working together towards one goal, which was an amazing experience when it all started. But the government after that, or the force that was governing from behind, was always trying to work over the past 5 years towards separating people, and they actually succeeded. So you wouldn't find people agreeing on the same thing anymore. There is not one goal. So from this side, it's not unity anymore. But on the other hand, people unite on something, one thing, that their conditions are really terrible, which is always a beginning. So, you know, after the cheerleaders for the military and the military general who's become the president now, there was a wave of cheerleading for them. Now it's recessing a little bit. People are complaining again, and that's exactly what happened in the beginning. The revolution happened because people were complaining about life. Salaries are terrible, prices are rising, so you start hearing the same conversations again. People complain again. So I think that will also result into something. I don't know when, but nothing changed positively for the masses.
The other idea that when we talk sometimes, not that often, but we are always interested that you say, like, you know, I remember once you said that, you know, we will start something and maybe in 50 years, you know, that will be the result. I just thought that, wow, it's probably there is something Egyptian in that, because you have the history of thousands of years, so maybe you can think about 50 years it's something very short, because you think like if it's something, because we have at least formally a shorter history. So really, how you treat this time, how you find this way to see the things in the long term, I mean, and to get this patience.
Well, it's not really patience, because I mean, I have a life in Cairo, a very normal life. I wake up in the morning, I have breakfast, I work on my stuff, and then at night I go see my friends. That's my day in Cairo. And other people, they wake up, they go to work, they work their asses off, and then they go home and meet their families, have dinner with their children, and then have sex and go to bed, or not have sex, or whatever. So life goes on. The details are the same all over the world. So I'm not waiting for something to happen, so I don't feel like I'm being patient. I'm just thinking of the inevitability of history. When I say that maybe something will happen later on, maybe in 20 years, in 50 years, I'm actually thinking of other histories of other countries where I know, for example, that Chile, for example, they revolted against the military dictatorship for about 20 years. So when I think of that, I think, okay, well, maybe we're dealing with the same issue. So I can't actually expect something to change next month, or expect that the revolution that happened in the 25th of January would result into a change of regime all of a sudden. It's just an awareness of the complication of the situation, I would say, not patience per se. Because my daily life is not affected negatively. I can still make art, I can still do the activities that I like to do, I can still make work for a music festival in the middle of the desert, so life goes on, you know.
I wonder, like, maybe that's also the time for you to ask the questions, if you have. I mean, I always have mine, but...
Anybody has questions? You can ask in Ukrainian.
Yeah, I think we should ask also. Ми можемо перекласти насправді запитання. Okay.
I have one question. I don't know if it's right to ask such a question, but I see that you use the art of ancient Egypt, but as I know, like Islamic people destroy this art, destroy lots of buildings and lots of very important memory, as I know, but you use it, and I don't understand how you identify yourself as an Egyptian who like this, who use it, or like an Islam person. Like, is it no contradiction between this, or it's like postmodernism here? I don't know.
No, that's fine. It's actually a very good question. I just have to make a clarification because I know that you watched recently in the news a lot of artifacts being destroyed, but that doesn't happen in Egypt. It happened in Iraq, where ISIS is the very extreme Islamic nation that was created there. So this is really far away from where I live. And it's far away from my culture also, because those artifacts are not ancient Egyptian artifacts. But I understand that you're talking about this concept of radical Islam destroying ancient artifacts.
I'm just talking that there are no ancient Egypt. There are no people from Egypt. There are people who come to this territory and live in this territory and just have other language, other culture, and that's like nothing common, just the place. So Ukrainians and anybody can live there and can just say that we're Egyptian, but this culture is not like modern culture. It's very, very ancient. It's dead. So
The ancient Egyptian culture, you mean?
Yeah,
The ancient Egyptian civilization.
yes, civilization.
Well, nothing is dead in that meaning, because these artifacts are signifiers for history, the layers of history that actually this land went through. So whether you like it or not, it would actually influence your visual. So I'm not showing it, as I said in the very beginning, just to emphasize that Egyptians are the best nation in the world, but to show you my visual vocabulary, what influenced me. And then you made the assumption that I'm an Islamic person, but there are lots of Christians living in Egypt, lots of Muslims, and lots of non-believers. For example, I'll tell you about my family. My father is from a Muslim family, and my mother is from a Christian family. So, and on the identity card of all Egyptians, you have to have a religion. Being secular is not acknowledged in Egypt. So society does not accept secularism, but it exists. Like, society does not accept gays, for example, in Egypt, but there are lots of gays, of course, men and women. So the fact that what you know about this common notion about this culture is that they are Muslims doesn't mean that everybody that comes from there is Muslim. So I just needed to make that clarification, because as a child, my dad's family would take me to pray in a mosque, but then my mother's family would take me to pray in a church. I celebrated both holidays, and I was never brought up in a religious way. And I still can't identify myself as an Islamic artist. I'm not an Islamic artist. I'm Bassem Yousri, an artist. And the fact that I'm Egyptian doesn't describe my art, it describes where I come from. So that's how I consider myself. And I came to speak to you today not as an Egyptian artist, and not as a young revolutionary artist, and not as an artist representative of other artists in Egypt. I am myself, full stop.
I understand it. Don't take my question so like aggressive question. Like
No. I'm sorry if I seem aggressive. I just needed to tell you this piece of information.
And I have one more question. Like I saw that you started to collaborate, and it's like your personal evolution that you just was ready for this. And I know, like, I also don't like to collaborate with other people, like doing some work.
I assume you're a Ukrainian artist.
Still no.
Okay.
But do you feel responsible to collaborate with people? It's like the need of to be a cool artist. You need to hear the voice of like little people or not little people.
I understand you. I understand.
To sound like bad little people, but people who don't have power. And or it was just some inner wish, just to just to make something crazy and something new, or it's a real need for artists to hear the voice of people, or just how do you feel about this?
I don't feel that or think that there is one way for artists to work. So I don't think that all artists should work in collaborations. I think if you enjoy collaborating with other people, then you should collaborate with other people. If you enjoy working in your studio by yourself until you die, I think you should do that also. So I don't have this notion that collaborative art is better than non-collaborative art. Not at all, because I still work in my studio by myself. I still enjoy that. And the fact that I started doing public art or collaborative art was by coincidence, because I had just graduated from my master's degree and I had no money, so I needed a job. So the job that was available was this mural job, and I actually hated the idea of working with the community at that time, but I thought, okay, I need the money. So I was accepted, I was forced to work with the community, and it changed my life. It changed the way I think about art making. So now when I create collaborative work, it's not because I think it's cool, it's just because I think it's a completely different mindset and a completely different context that really enriches me, because I realized that I actually learn from people. And I don't see them as little people, I see them as collaborators, but maybe I'm the director of the work. And sometimes I could collaborate in another person's work, and then I would be the little people and he or she would be the director of the work. Like often I'm asked to act, make small roles or big roles in friends' movies, for example. And I do accept and I submit. Like in that case, I'm just a little person in the context of a movie directed by a completely different person. So they can't tell me, okay, you have to say this in an angry way in this scene, and I object and I say, no, I have to say it in my way. I can't do that if I'm working with another person. But this is just an example, because when you work in collaborative process, you actually need to listen to other people and take their opinion, work together. Yeah.
One more question.
Maybe somebody else. Yeah, you had a couple of them. Okay, but
I'm sorry.
No,
no,
don't be
it's
sorry,
fine.
please.
It's just like that.
The question about like something stereotypic question, like it's like the myth that in Islam countries like women have no power, and I saw that they take part in your art, in your movie, and like what's the role of the women in like Arabic Spring, in all this political stuff and art politics and art that like also connected with politics.
Yeah.
Like, or it's only man job.
No, it's not like that, because there is also a problem when you watch the news about an Arab country, that you think that all Arab countries are like that, for example, because the news only show you a very small picture, and then there's this label of the Middle East, and the Middle East, like when I say Eastern Europe, do you relate to that? You're an East European country. What does that mean? Because I'm sure that Poland is very different from Ukraine, very different from Georgia, very different from Belarus. So I think that the problem here is that people think of Egypt the same way they think about Libya and Syria and Lebanon and Iraq. But the conditions in all of these countries are very different from one another. So to answer your question, Egypt also has different areas with different ways of life. But I come from a big city, one of the biggest cities in the world. So what I see every day is lots of cars, lots of bicycles, lots of motorcycles, lots of men, lots of women walking in the street. There are some veiled women covering their hair. There are some women covering their faces and wearing black dress. But there are girls who wear short sleeves and sometimes short skirts, but not always. But they don't cover their hair or face. They work in culture, they work in politics, they work in governmental spaces, They do all kinds of jobs. They sell goods in grocery stores, in pharmacies. They drive cars. They drive bicycles, which is a recent thing in Egypt. They actually sit in cafes in the street in open air and smoke hookah with men. Women, my friends, they smoke cigarettes, for example, in public. That's normal. We have bars, and women and men go to bars and drink beer. So it's way more diverse than the image that you could get living abroad and just getting the news. And often, you know, people who visit Egypt for the first time, they would be really surprised with how, like, Natalia could talk about that, but maybe you didn't have a preconception, I don't know. But it's just more diverse, and the role of women is very important in the revolution also, because it was men and women together, and there was no, you couldn't feel differentiation actually in the roles, because a woman could be saying, how do you say that, a slogan, and then men would repeat after her. So it wasn't men leading women, sometimes it was women leading men.
Yeah, and I just was interested about something between the feministic art connected with photos, because I was certainly interested in this, and just I found like Arabic woman who made graffiti, and that was so crazy cool. Like when like a girl with that with black clothes, with no face, no hair, and she making some like slogans that are really aggressive, like in a good way, and that was so cool because I thought that these women, they like feel so isolated from public space. So that was like my interest, like how women feel in this revolution.
In the revolution specifically, they just feel like the women here in the revolution also. They were protesting, and there was women completely covered protesting next to men, and there were also women who looked just like any other woman in the world, like a worldly looking woman, just like how I look very worldly also with my shirt, and that's what I wear also in Egypt, you know. So it's similar, you know.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So if you have, I would, if somebody else have a question, otherwise I would abuse my position to ask something else.
Please don't let her know that.
There would be something else which I hadn't asked, but really, no, or maybe something I had asked. So really, the question would be, maybe more general. I'm curious, what do you think, how we can really change this? It's very banal, like we all have the stereotypes about the other places. It doesn't matter how far they are. And you know, sometimes anything it's very hard. You say you don't represent anybody in that way, but how to deal with this representation when you come to another part of the world, when you're speaking about your society, because you know the news are about extremes. The art is always about extremes. You usually like tackle the extremes.
Yeah.
So usually those people who don't know, they know just extremes about your society. How to make people interested not into the extremes, in kind of a boring and different things.
Well, I don't think it's my position to change that by myself. I can't actually change it, and I'm not trying to change it, to be honest with you. I'm just, I would say that this kind of stereotypical notions between different cultures, they change when ends meet, often. So by being here, you're actually, like the people who invited me, like Anna and like the CCA Foundation, is helping Ukrainian people come and attend a talk by Egyptian artists, and it doesn't bother me to be described as Egyptian because I'm Egyptian, but how I contribute to that is just by being myself, by presenting my work as sincerely as possible. But I don't know if I have this responsibility on my shoulders to actually change your views towards the Arab world. But by answering your questions as sincerely as possible, hopefully I'm giving you a clearer image of my life. So I can only speak about my life in that context, because you could have invited another artist who has completely different beliefs from my beliefs, and who's also Egyptian. So Egyptian is not one thing, or Arab is not one thing or the other. It's just, yeah.
And the other thing is about the, tackling and talking to the audience, about the sensitive issues. You try a bit to push the boundaries.
Yeah.
But also what we talked, there was this, for instance, case of this girl, I forget already her name, who kind of posed naked, and there was a big, and she had to leave Egypt, and there was a lot of, she was often condemned, and her life was threatened. But I'm curious about your idea, because there are a lot of, for instance, sensitive issues now. There are more, especially when the life and death situation are involved. It's very complicated to talk about the war. It's very complicated to talk about, because there are some things which are sacred. So it's very hard to discuss, for instance, the issue of, let's say, soldiers who are dying in the front, and there are a lot of sensitive issues. But sometimes the artists really try to, because if not, who else would kind of push these boundaries? But what is the limitation? Do you have something? Because what I felt that we discussed that there is something to make this audience to hear, that it's not just totally, how to make this audience receptive. What is your ideas about that?
I think it's a very, it's a simple equation, but it's not an easy one. But let's imagine if, what's your name?
Lesia.
Lesia?
It's difficult to pronounce.
If Lesia asked me the question she asked me, and they said, "I'm sorry, this is a very stupid question, I'm not answering it," I think everybody in the room would have left the room, not just her. So I think it's the same thing with other topics, that especially that I am putting myself in the position of presenting my work to an audience, not with this presentation, but I mean in a gallery space. I'm actually presenting my work to an audience, not to myself. So I need to respect the audience. And this applies to the way I tackle subject matter. So I'm very aware of the social and political and religious taboos in Egyptian society. So if I decide to actually say something that I know for sure would actually turn some people completely off or offend them, then I'm not starting a conversation. I'm actually kicking them out of the gallery, and that's not what I'm trying to do. Because the thing is that how my work developed, it's because I realized that art is language. It's a way to communicate. So I'm just sharing with you my ideas in hope that maybe a conversation would start, maybe a critical conversation would take place, not just as an egotistical activity where I show you my work, expecting everybody to say, "Oh, Bassem, you're the best artist in the world." I don't expect that. I mean, it's very pleasing to the ears to hear that, but that's not the case all the time. There's always bad reviews of the show or critical reviews of shows, but then there are always cheerleaders, and then there are people who don't care. So that's always the case. But to intentionally try to offend people, then you're actually dismissing them, and it's not my intention to do that. So my answer to your question is just respecting, the beliefs of the people. You could always try to push the boundaries of things that you don't think are very sacred as much as people think, but tackle them in a way that make people ask questions and not actually get angry and try to beat you up, for example. So that's how I try to tackle these sensitive issues.
Okay, so if you don't have any specific questions so far, I would really say thank you to Bassem, and I think that we got really learned something probably different, and something not everybody expected, which is good, because there was not that much expectation, because you don't know what to expect, and I really hope that there is really this bridge between the societies, I wonder how it will end. Maybe we'll make an installation somewhere here as well. Дякую вам дуже. Отож, я сподіваюся, всім було цікаво і, звісно, можна слідкувати далі. Це довга історія, яка нас ще дуже довго стосуватиметься. Так. Ви скажете про культуру завтра? У вас все вже закінчилося, всі весь проєкт, чи що буде далі?
Це вже була остання подія дискусійної складової проєкту «Культура завтра», але ми продовжуємо нашу спецставу на коридорі. Статті, що далі будуть з'являтися, це можна читати. Також нагадаємо, що в нас є з собою публікація «Культура завтра», яка підсумовує проєкт, ну, принаймні його частину. Можна її подивитися, придбати, якщо ви хочете. І скоро ми починаємо роботу над проєктом, тому приєднуйтеся. Дякую.